Mark from the States, Mark from the States, it's Mark from the United States.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Mark from the States, how we doing today? I am doing, fantastic, of course. Hopefully you're fantastic as well. Thank you so much for coming. Requested video today, and it's from the history guy who I absolutely love. I want to thank him personally for allowing us to watch and learn from his channel. So if you have one like and one subscription to give today, I encourage you to go give it to the history guy over at his channel. It is important that we support the original content creators. Yes, we know this already, right? I say it every video, but it really is important, and I will keep saying it every video. So get over there if you don't already. I know a lot of you already do, or already have. Just one like goes a long way. So just please get over there and support them. There'll be two links right below here. One to his channel, one to this video, and you can go watch the video first, then come back, help me. As we know, that's how I do the learning, and then we're all happy, right? Thank you for being a part of the channel family. Big fake couch here. I don't know if you can see Leo. Leo is, I'm just going to turn the monitor. There's Leo. Sitting there. And Violet's over doing her thing over there. But this is Left Behind at Dunkirk. That is the title of the video. We all know the story. We all know what happened at Dunkirk. The rescue that saved the war, I guess, for the Allies at that point. Being able to get all those men off of the beaches there. Many movies, stories, books, so on and so forth have told the story of the rescue. But what about the men left behind? They obviously didn't get all of them, right? What happened to those guys? I mean, you don't really hear too much about them. It's true. I don't know of any movie that tells that story. So, what happened to the ones that weren't picked up on the beaches? Anyway, history guy's going to tell us and inform us. So I encourage you to hang out with me. Let's learn something today. Maybe there's something here you didn't know. Maybe all of it you do, but it's okay. You're watching with me and I appreciate it. So thank you. Let's get into it, shall we? Oh, before we start, live stream Sunday, 7 my time. I believe it's 3 o'clock your time in the afternoon. So if you can come by, say hello, that would be awesome, as always. So Sunday is the live stream. Let's do it.
The 1940 miracle at Dunkirk, where hundreds of thousands of Allied troops were ferried across the English Channel in all manner of ships, including the famous little ships, is a legendary and well-remembered piece of history. It was a remarkable achievement, but it overshadowed a tragedy. For while those thousands of men were shuffling on the ships, thousands more were still left behind, fighting or already captured by the relentless German war machine. In the end, some tens of thousands of Allied troops, including 40,000 Britons, were left behind in France, fighting the battles that made the miracle possible. Little could they have known at the time the extent of the sacrifice that they were making, or how they would be forgotten by their nation. The forgotten prisoners of Dunkirk deserve to be remembered.
Yeah, interesting.
For every 7 men rescued at Dunkirk, there was one left behind. French rearguard forces had remained in place throughout the evacuation. Some 35,000 French troops, out of ammunition and with their backs to the sea, surrendered on June 4th. Most of the British 51st Highland Division, stationed along the eastern part of the Maginot Line, were heavily engaged in the days after the Germans turned south and never reached Dunkirk. Nearly 10,000 soldiers of the 51st were captured at St. Valery-en-Caux, including Major General Victor Fortune, one of the most senior British officers captured in the entire war. Others were captured in the desperate fight to Dunkirk, while yet more were captured in other dramatic defenses like the one at Calais. There were other lesser-known rescue operations. Nearly 3,500 Allied troops were pulled out of St. Valery and Le Havre, while Operation Ariel withdrew more than 190,000 soldiers from Cherbourg, St. Malo, and other ports. For those captured, a British soldier described the ensuing years. And then we got 5 years of hell. Around 1.8 million French soldiers were captured in the fall of France.
Whoa,
Although the Vichy government
that's a
chose
lot.
collaboration, Germany refused to send any of those men home until a final peace treaty was concluded. It never was. Treatment initially after capture varied. Many POWs were surprised at how well they were treated by frontline soldiers, who often praised the fighting spirit of their outnumbered and outgunned foes. British soldier Peter Wagstaff remembered a German gunnery colonel standing to attention and giving me a bottle of beer. Others recalled German soldiers giving wounded POWs rides on motorcycles to prisoner enclosures. But that wasn't to be the norm. There is no doubt that there's a vast difference between the treatment by the fighting soldier at the front and the administrative bastard at the back.
The administrative bastard at the back. That is so so true, I guess. I mean, you hear stories of how the opposing combatant is friendly and almost is like your friend. You hear these stories a lot. You know, across the board, that's just not how it is. But because you hear of all the tragedy and all the ruthlessness and just the callous evil nature of sometimes that war will bring out in humans. But the stat for every I'm trying to remember the stat because it came at it so fast. Was it something like for every 7 there was 1 left behind or something like that? And it's just mind-boggling that you don't, at least me, I can't speak for everyone else, but at least me, just don't realize how many were left. I mean, the sheer number of French prisoner of war is just, that's, I don't, it's just like, how do you keep them all? It's a weird question to ask. It's a lot of money to house prisoners. It's a lot of resources. So, but the saying that for every nice guy up front, there's always that idiot jerk in the back administrator who's a by-the-book guy who doesn't have that personal interaction with any. They're just a number, right? It's interesting, though. I mean, this is not to take away the feat of that we all of the history that we all know of what happened at Dunkirk. It was truly amazing. But this, of course, isn't told as much, at least to me, or in where I'm looking. Maybe there's some of you who know this story really well, which wouldn't surprise me. And I would like for you to add to the conversation afterwards if you have a lot of knowledge in this, for sure. Helps me learn, yes?
Staff said. Another said that when the B echelon troops turned up, they kicked us all the way up the road. Wounded officers were made to stand in the gutter for hours or spend a night in a cowshed that was deep in liquid manure. And there were massacres. 90 men of the 2nd Battalion Royal Norfolk Regiment were gunned down at a farmhouse at Le Pardis by SS troops. Only 2 survived. At Wormhout, members of the Royal Warwickshire Regiment were herded into a barn where SS soldiers threw grenades and opened fire. Other violence and murder was common. Germany had signed the Geneva Conventions in the 1929 conference, which included the Convention relative to the treatment of prisoners of war, a new convention to address issues of the First World War. The convention required soldiers to be removed from the combat zone as quickly as possible, but many were immediately put to work. The convention also banned using POWs to assist in ongoing fighting, but members of the Royal Army Service Corps were forced to operate a ferry across a canal to aid the Germans in chasing down retreating forces. The Germans organized frontline work camps immediately. They cleared up damage and assisted the Germans in thieving all manner of consumer goods from French factories to be sent to Germany. Prisoners were not to work in ways directly related to the war effort, but British prisoners were used to load and unload munitions, moving to the front, and cut down trees to make runways for the Luftwaffe.
So they basically did not follow anything that the Geneva Convention laid out at all. Sounds like. Which is not something new for me to hear. In this case, yes, specifically this, but as a whole, I knew, and I just never, followed any of that sort of thing when it became to humane treatment. Dang. And when they do that to your soldiers, the urge, which I find just actually tremendous, and it happened all throughout the war. The Allies, English, American, French, probably retaliated with German prisoners, and you get it because of the continuous treatment that they were getting, that their comrades were getting. But as a whole, it's pretty remarkable that I think as a whole, prisoners were treated so well, especially in Britain. German prisoners were treated, phenomenally.
The Red Cross eventually discovered these men and were shocked by their treatment. The huts are falling to pieces. Food is poor and insufficient. Conditions of hygiene are deplorable. At a Mulhouse, 500 British prisoners revolted after an epidemic of disease. The Germans chose 20 men at random and executed them. The Germans offered little accommodation for the wounded. Many were forced, despite serious injuries, to march kilometers without food or water. Soldiers were denied treatment and ambulances were attacked. According to the Geneva Conventions, medical staff and seriously wounded POWs were required to be repatriated, but the reality of the war meant that the system simply didn't work. Wounded soldiers being repatriated through Spain were turned away in March of 1942 in retaliation for British bombing of Vichy factories. Negotiations in 1941 between the British and Germans continued to deadlock, and the first disabled prisoners weren't repatriated until 1943, 3 years later, when they were finally traded at Gothenburg, Sweden, for wounded Germans captured in North Africa. Some soldiers remained at large, living under assumed identities or attempting to make their way back to England. In February 1941, London received a report suggesting 1,000 soldiers were hiding around Brussels, and later that year, a report from Spain estimated 5,000 British hiding in the Pas-de-Calais.
One last thing. I mean, when you really just look at the Geneva Convention and the documents that were signed, it's just pieces of paper. You're not going to force, if they have evil in their heart, they're not going to follow something that was signed by someone else, especially, when you have these delusions. It's who's enforcing that? You have to enforce it, you have to win the war. And they did, thank God. And then all those dudes got what's coming, but you could just kind of tell the two different ethos of the nations involved. Ones who had morals and who, really at times probably struggled over that document or the convention and what was laid out and the rules, and while the other did not care.
Some soldiers remained at large, living under assumed identities or attempting to make their way back to England. In February 1941, London received a report suggesting 1,000 soldiers were hiding around Brussels, and later that year, a report from Spain estimated 5,000 British hiding in the Pas-de-Calais. Some managed to escape through a kind of underground railroad that led to Spain and eventually Gibraltar. Not that reaching Spain meant the risk was over. Numerous soldiers were interred by the Spanish government under pressure from the Germans. One, hiding in Paris, enjoyed giving German soldiers enjoying the sights in Paris deliberately wrong directions. Another officer, William Broad, circulated openly with French friends and was once eating at a French restaurant when Hermann Goering walked in.
Oh,
They received
boy.
help also from American embassies, which provided funds, from Irish consulates who handed passports to British soldiers with Irish heritage, and from others, like the Polish at the Queen Victoria Memorial Hospital. But for most of the captured, the worst still lay ahead. As one British POW overheard a German guard, "The English bear the blame for all evil and must be destroyed." On the march from France to Germany, one group of men was forced to run uphill shouting "Chamberlain" as the Germans filmed. Captain Ernest Hart of the Northumberland Fusiliers was shot dead on the march when he attempted to intervene after a German officer attacked one of his men. They were forced to endure grueling marches of up to 36 miles, 58 kilometers, though the Geneva Convention mandated a maximum of 12. Some were marched in circles to pass through as many towns as possible as a display of triumph. One group was forced to march for 24 hours with only 20-minute breaks every 4 hours. After 24 hours, they're given an hour's rest before being marched for another 24
Dang.
for 6 days. Anyone who fell was shot. When the British government complained, the Germans replied that they had no information regarding charges of bad transport, but that they would investigate if the British government can give information as to the date and place of alleged offenses.
Oh, jeez. Oh, that's awful. I mean, yeah, you hear all the time about how the Japanese treated their POWs and how poorly and horrible and but you don't really hear the stories here. But apparently they're just as bad, if not worse, in some cases. But of course they're going to go, "We have no idea. What are you talking about?" Again, how can you enforce it? It's just laying the groundwork for after the fighting has stopped.
Multiple reports suggest the Germans discriminated against the British. When the Red Cross in Antwerp attempted to feed British POWs, they were told that they would have to feed the guards, too. An American attaché reported that British prisoners had their boots taken away and were dressed in old bowlers crammed down, women's hats and articles taken from fancy shops in order to make them look ridiculous. They slept in the open without coats, boots, or clothes, sometimes in flooded fields. The POWs reported receiving meager rations, mildewed bread loaves shared between 10 men, thin barley soup with half an ounce of sausage, described as nothing more than dirty water cooked in a pig trough. They were given no bowls and instead fought over rusted cans or cup soup in their hands. They killed ducks, chickens, dogs found along the road. Civilians tried to feed and give water to the men, but they were often attacked and beaten for the trouble, and water buckets were kicked over. When a guard tried to stop several prisoners from pulling up water from a well, they simply pushed him down it. The United Nations later reported that when the British prisoners starved, the much larger numbers of French troops were comparatively well provided with food, proving that the arrangements for their accommodation was deliberate. It took weeks for the marchers to finally reach POW camps in Germany. Many marched for 6 weeks or more before being taken by cattle train. Others were forced into coal barges without toilet facilities. One recalled that they were expected to hang from a pole off the edge of the barge. For food, they were given raw potatoes, and enlisted man Dick Taylor had the astute idea to collect the peelings as others threw them away. Many were taken to camps at Trier and Dortmund, others to Maastricht in the Netherlands. Some were taken much farther, to Prussia or Poland. In cities like Danzig and Thorn, they met crowds of cheering German women and children who spat on them and threw stones, manure, and rotten eggs. At the camp, they were shaved, deloused, and given a disc, actually a rectangular tag, with their POW ID number. They were showered. One soldier described the naked bodies of the captured with skulls like a phrenologist's dream and the fleshless bodies of the starving. No mother would have recognized her darling. At Thorn, they were housed in dank, dark underground forts. At others, they lived in hastily constructed barracks. One remembered that you had to stand when a German officer entered, and if you weren't fast enough, you would be clubbed with rubber hoses filled with sand. The food was still abysmal. One soldier said that the bread was so molded and the potatoes so black that pigs would turn their noses up at them, but the men were starving. When they dished out potatoes from these boxes, men would fight over what you could scrape from the inside of the box, one POW wrote. Another was using the book he was reading as toilet paper and joked that it was a race between his intellect and his bowels as to which finished the book first. Under the Geneva Convention, POWs could be used for work if they were under the rank of sergeant, but rules were stringent. They could not be given dangerous jobs, were to be given equal rations to civilians, be paid, and housed in clean and heated accommodations. Few of these rules were followed.
Shocker.
Men were put to work in the salt, coal, copper, and lignite mines of Upper Silesia. They were made to cut trees, build local buildings, or shovel snow from runways. It was a relief to go to work, one Northumberland Fusilier said. If I hadn't been working, I'd have gone round the bend. But the work, too, was miserable. The jobs in the mines and granite quarries were dangerous, and men were often injured or killed. The guard thinks we are horses, although he calls us swine. Working in rain, no parcels, no smokes, threats of shooting now make our lot, one man explained. As the years passed, some things improved. Slightly better rations, but also better trade with the locals, and regular Red Cross deliveries with food and cigarettes. But some things didn't. On their first Christmas, one soldier made the mistake of laughing, but the guard thought that he was laughing at them, a POW remembered, so the guard shot him, dead.
Oh my
Another recalled
gosh.
a man who'd had enough and made a hopeless effort to escape. They riddled him with bullets. We found what was left of him hanging on the barbed wire, another POW remembered. They left him there for 3 days as a warning to us. Humans can be worse than animals.
Right.
In the post-war years, movies and television would paint a relatively rosy picture of POW life. Films like The Great Escape and the television show Hogan's Heroes, where uniformed men were obsessed with nothing but escape. Very few people actually escaped, and the punishment for being caught could be horrifying. A lance corporal that had escaped briefly was taken to the punishment cells, stripped, and beaten for 26 days. Still, some did. Officer Harry Neve, captured at Calais, escaped from Colditz Castle and reached Gibraltar. Captain Patrick Reed also escaped from Colditz, reaching Switzerland in 1942. He wrote the Colditz Story, which became the basis of a film and television adaptation. Some men managed to escape by a more dangerous route, reaching Soviet Russia.
We did a video on Colditz Castle. I think it might still be up on the channel. I don't know. You'd have to look. But that was an amazing story as well.
The officers were not allowed to work by the rules of the Geneva Convention, and generally they didn't. They were also allowed to contact England, and some were able to send flowers and presents to their families. The officers' main enemy was more prosaic: boredom. It wasn't without its dangers. Men with serious depression earned the nickname sack hounds, as they would hardly stir from their beds for days on end. By 1943, the British Army estimated 30% of long-term prisoners would be mentally unfit for service. Were they freed? Some suggested trading healthy prisoners, but the British canned the idea when they realized the Germans would get fighting men, and the British would get men who needed to be immediately discharged. After years of misery, the POWs then began to feel the tide change. Rationing in Germany suddenly made supplies of soap in Red Cross packages almost look like gold. News of the Normandy landings in the summer of 1944 was enough to bring spirits up. One thing they couldn't ignore was the increase in bombing raids. Many of the prisoners were working in war industries that were directly targeted by the campaign. POW Eric Reeves was working at a synthetic fuel manufacturing plant when it was hit in June of 1944. They hit the place while we were working, but we weren't allowed to in air raid shelters. They worried, too, that the bombing would turn the Germans against them even further. Civilians stopped saying hello, and one guard came back to camp spiteful and angry because his family had been killed in a bombing raid. Wouldn't have taken much for them to turn on us, one POW
Oh
said.
my gosh, yeah.
As the Allies closed in on Germany, things got worse for the prisoners again. Food rations dried up and Red Cross packages stopped. They'd always worked hard in the winter, digging up sugar beets from frozen ground without coats or gloves, but the winter of 1945 would be the hardest yet. It was the coldest in Europe in decades, and in the first months of the year, the Germans closed the camps in the east, in Poland and Prussia and Czechoslovakia. As the Soviets pushed forward, the POWs were marched out of their camps in the dead of winter. With them came prisoners from the concentration camps, and even worse shaped than them, and desperate German civilians. When
That must have been quite a moment, seeing prisoners of the other camp.
POW was told by a guard that the thermometer read negative 35 degrees Celsius. Just like the march east, the men were usually expected to sleep in the open. You just dropped in a field, dug a hole in the snow to keep the wind out, and with a bit of luck, you woke up in the morning. They marched for months and hundreds of miles under some of the worst conditions and in the worst despair they had ever faced. As men dropped out of line, they'd be shot. Maybe it was better they did shoot them, one survivor said. Otherwise, they'd have just frozen to death. The men suffered severely from frostbite. Some of the POWs were overtaken by the Soviet army and were eventually picked up in ports like Odessa by British ships. More men escaped on the march, finding their own way to Allied lines. Slowly but surely, they were liberated by Allied forces. One group of British, freed by the Russians, was told to head west to the American lines, through the no man's land between them. They ran into a tractor pulling trailers full of German troops. "Halt!" one of the men yelled. The German stuck his head out and asked who they were. The POW shouted back that he was the bloody British Army, and the Germans offered to give the men a ride on their way to the American lines. But going home was not a picnic either. Eric Reeves remembered going to a pub his first night back and getting struck dumb with fear when he saw the pub was full of women. Everybody stopped and looked at us. We turned tail and fled back to camp. As another put it, there was no such thing as a joyous homecoming. The government did some to help the returning soldiers. They established civil resettlement units with 4 to 6 week long courses, when former POWs said it was the only good idea the Army ever had. In general, the men weren't interested in staying in the Army. They'd done their part. Thank God for the atom bomb, one said. I think the boys would have revolted rather than go and do it all again. They had lost their youth and felt out of step with the post-war world, one author summarized. They had other problems, too. The Army quibbled about pay, deducting, for instance, the valueless money paid to them by the Germans. This makes a man a little bitter, one medic said. They received no medals, as there was no campaign medal ever made for the fight in 1940. One former POW said that he could always pick out a man captured in 1940 by the lack of medals on his chest. The movies and the world seem to want to move on without addressing their experiences. They've forgotten all about us, one complained. There were 8,000 prisoners from my division who were still fighting, while those who get all the credit were getting away. It is unclear how many of the men captured in 1940 died in the POW camps, but of the around 170,000 British POWs in the war, 25% died in the prisoner of war camps. By comparison, the death rate for French prisoners of war was just 3%. It would be years before books were published that would accurately describe the experiences of these traumatized men, and in the public mind, their plight has never been fully realized or understood. Their sacrifice was important. They facilitated the critical morale boost of the Dunkirk evacuation, but they were essentially unrecognized for it. I hope you enjoyed watching this episode of The History Guy, and if you did, please feel free to like and subscribe and share The History Guy with your friends.
Wow. Incredible. Yeah, I definitely learned something today. This is going to stick with me for a little bit. I mean, we all heard about Japan and how they treated their prisoners of war, but nothing. I didn't realize it was like this. Especially, I could see why they were bitter when they got home. They felt like they were just forgotten and being erased from history. Wow, incredible story. Thank you so much to the History Guy. It's important that you get over there and support him. Links are below to the channel and to the video. Go there, watch the video again. Just one like helps. So if you have one like, one subscription to give it to the History Guy. It is important. I hope everybody's happy, healthy, and safe. We have a live stream Sunday, 3 o'clock, I believe, your time, but double check, please. And I hope you have a great rest of your day. I wasn't expecting where this video was going. It really wasn't. Have a good one, and we'll see you in the next one. Take care. Bye.
Mark from the States, Mark from the States, it's Mark. Yeah.